Hi everybody, my name is Alice Volpitta. I'm your Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper here at Blue Water, Baltimore. Thank you so much for taking some time to join with us. Right now we're doing a Q&A live session about the violations that were discovered at the Patapsco and Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant here in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. So I'm here today with my lovely coworkers, Lauren Paulett and Liana Powell, and so they'll be asking some questions about what's been going on, and hopefully I can give some answers. So as we go through this Q&A, if you have any specific questions about what you've been seeing in the news, what you've been hearing on Twitter, or any questions about sewage plants or our water quality monitoring in general, just let us know. Just drop a line in the comment section and we'll get to your question as soon as we can. So let's go ahead and get started just with a little overview of the issue and what's going on right now. So to start with, Blue Water Baltimore has been operating a rigorous water quality monitoring program in the tidal Patapsco River, the tributaries that flow into it, and the streams that flow into it, the Gwynns Falls and the Jones Falls, since 2010. In 2010, we started off as a bacteria monitoring program in the Baltimore Harbor, and then in 2013, that monitoring program expanded both in scale and in scope. So we started taking samples at a specific location right over top of the effluent pipe at the Patapsco Wastewater Treatment Plant in 2013. So beginning from 2013 to 2015, Blue Water Baltimore started documenting fogs in the water coming out of that treatment plant. That's fats, oils, and grease. And as a result of the evidence that we collected, Baltimore City was brought under a consent order by the Maryland Department of the Environment to fix the problems at the sewage plant. So fast forward 5 years to 2021, Blue Water Baltimore put our boat in, the muckraker boat, into the water in April of 2021 to start collecting samples for the season. This is just our routine sampling. In April of 2021, we discovered very high bacteria levels at the effluent pipe coming from the wastewater treatment plant. So one bad bacteria level doesn't necessarily indicate a problem. On May 4th, we collected another sample. 24 hours later, we got the results. It was a second bad bacteria reading. So that day, May 5th, we alerted MDE to the problem, and the very next day, MDE sent an inspector to the wastewater treatment plant to investigate. The inspector found significant violations inside the plant that are leading to effluent violations. And when I say effluent violations, that means pollution. They're finding pollution discharging into our local waterways. And as a result of that inspection, MDE went and did another inspection at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant and also found significant violations there. So now we know that there's partially untreated sewage being discharged into our local waterways, nearly 130 million gallons per day on average, but it can be a lot more than that on rainy days. So we have a lot of sewage entering our waterways illegally, and now MDE is poised to act and to enforce the terms of the Clean Water Act. So as your Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper, we're amplifying this story and letting the public know, because ultimately our work is predicated upon amplifying your voice. And so this is your opportunity to ask questions about anything that I just talked about, and anything about these plants or a monitoring program, all that good stuff. So I'm going to pass it over to Liana and see if there's any questions to start off.
Yeah, we actually got a few questions in advance, thanks to folks who submitted them. The first question is this the first time that these plants have messed up? What's the history?
So both of these plants have histories of non-compliance. And when I say non-compliance, I'm talking about the permits that they are issued to be able to discharge effluent or that treated sewage back out into the rivers. The way that a sewage plant, a treatment plant works is that all of the sewage comes into the plant. It's separated out into the water that's to be treated and discharged back out into the river and then into biosolids. So that's the way that a sewage plant really works. And both of these plants have histories of non-compliance with their permits. I think the really significant thing that we discovered through our investigation of both of these facilities is that at the Patapsco plant, they are discharging more than their annual allocated load for some pollutants, including nitrogen and phosphorus. And so what that means is that not only are they sometimes discharging too much sewage into the water, but on an annual basis, we're discharging way too many pollutants that are leading to algae blooms and fish kills.
All right, Kathy asked about the Headworks project at the Back River Treatment Plant. We've heard that 80% of the sewage overflows in Baltimore City were supposed to be solved by that. How does this discovery relate to the Headworks project?
That's a great question. So, the question is about the Headworks project, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about in the news, and it's a part of the modified consent decree for sewage overflows that Baltimore City currently has with MDE and EPA. So, Blue Water Baltimore was an intervener into that consent decree, and so we had a seat at the table in the negotiation phase for what that agreement ended up looking like. So the Headworks project is a separate project at the Back River Wastewater Treatment Plant that Baltimore City has put millions of dollars into in order to increase pipe capacity up the line. Right now there is a hydraulic restriction, or the pipes are too small and misaligned at the treatment plant. And so in order to fix that problem, the Headworks project has been installed and built at the plant. What I can say is that if there's significant operations and maintenance problems that have been discovered at both of these facilities, we have a lot of questions about whether or not that multi-million-dollar project is going to be able to adequately operate and clean up our local waterways and ultimately reduce the amount of sewage backups into Baltimore residents' homes.
So this is a pretty basic question that a lot of folks have. What is a consent decree or a consent order?
Oh, that's a good one. So they're a little bit different. What's the difference? What is a consent decree and a consent order, and then what's the difference? So a consent order is an agreement reached, but really an order brought against a state agency against a facility. So this facility must do something to fix a problem. A consent decree is a legal agreement at the federal level. And so Baltimore City currently has a modified consent decree for sewage overflows, which is a legal agreement, and it's a path that's laid out so that we know what projects need to go into the ground in order to solve our sewage overflow problems. So Baltimore City has this consent decree. It also has a consent order at the Patapsco wastewater treatment plant, specifically for reducing fats, oils, and grease that are being discharged into the water. So both of these things, they're a legal framework that allows a facility and the regulators to work together to negotiate the path forward when there are major deficiencies discovered in the operations or maintenance of that facility.
So this leads to another question that a lot of people have, which is, how has this gone on for so long? Why wasn't the first consent order working?
I think that's a great question. So again, these issues about the wastewater treatment plants that we just discovered, they're a little bit separated from the modified consent decree that we're talking about now. So Baltimore City originally entered into that consent decree for sewage overflows back in 2002, and the deadline to complete all of the work contemplated under it was 2016. And of course, 2016 came and went. We didn't finish all of those projects. We still had sewage overflowing into our waterways. And so the city entered into a modified consent decree for sewage overflows. And that's the point at which Blue Water Baltimore intervened and had a say in some of the really strong improvements that we saw in the modified version of the consent decree. So for example, sewage backups were not something that was contemplated under that original consent decree, but partially as a result of Blue Water Baltimore's intervention, we got some really good programs incorporated into the modified consent decree that are now being strengthened even further into what you might know as the Sewage On-Site Support Program. So I'm kind of winding around, going in a lot of different places here, because sewage is a big issue in Baltimore, and it's something that we've been involved in for a really long time. And myself specifically, I've been working on these sewage issues in Baltimore for about 7 years now. So I'm kind of touching on a lot of different issues, but that's kind of the difference or the link here between the modified consent decree and what we're seeing now. I will say that, MDE acted very quickly when we originally alerted them to this problem of the high bacteria levels that we were seeing outside of the Patapsco wastewater treatment plant. They sent an inspector out the very next day. However, there's a lot of self-reporting associated with operating a huge wastewater treatment plant like Patapsco or Back River, and really that begs the question, why wasn't anybody watching what was going on, or why wasn't action taken earlier? Why wasn't the public notified earlier than this? So again, kudos where it's due. MDE did get out there and conducted an investigation, and it appears that now they're taking enforcement action, or not that they're taking enforcement action, but that they're ready to. And that's all indicated in publicly available documents between MDE and DPW.
So who do we have to call to fix this? What do we do? What's our role as citizens, as residents, as organizations?
Yeah, so the question is, what can residents do? How do we fix this problem? And I think one of the ways that people can get involved in this is by reporting pollution when you see it. So this was an issue that we picked up as a part of our normal routine monitoring that we conduct every single week out on the harbor. And we can't be everywhere at once. So we happen to have a monitoring location here because it's a hotspot. We know that we're tracking water quality at this location, but pollution is happening all over the city and all throughout the county. So if you live within the Patapsco or Back River watershed, which we can share some information about where our watersheds really are, you can contact us, your Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper, and let us know about pollution. And that's anything from illicit sewage overflows, illegal dumping, all kinds of things. You can report that to us. Facilities that are illegally discharging certain things, you can report that to us, and that is the best first step about how to help this issue. I would also say that Blue Water Baltimore is a member-supported organization, and our power actually lies in the voices of our members. So under the Clean Water Act, there is the citizen suit enforcement provision, and that means that an organization like Blue Water Baltimore and your Baltimore Harbor Waterkeeper can only take legal action against a polluting entity because we are amplifying your voice. And so if you find meaning in that and that is valuable to you, you can make a tax-deductible donation to Blue Water Baltimore.
All right. So, Alice, Hurricane Ida is headed towards us. I know a lot of people have questions about heavy rain and safety.
Yeah.
So Pat asked, are we doing extra monitoring with heavy rain? Can you talk a little bit more about what rain means?
Sure. So you might think that the sanitary sewer system and rainfall have nothing to do with each other, and in an ideal world, maybe they wouldn't. However, we know that in Baltimore, our pipes are old and leaky, and when it rains, the sewage flows, unfortunately. So Blue Water Baltimore is planning on going out this week by land, not by boat, to collect some bacteria samples around the Baltimore Harbor for our rapid bacteria monitoring program. And you'll be able to find the results of those samples at baltimorewaterwatch.org probably on Friday afternoon. And so we continue to do our monitoring program even when Hurricane Ida is on our doorstep because it's really important. Ultimately, all of this rainfall is bringing with it trash, toxics, polluted stormwater, and sewage. So the rainwater is entering these sewage pipes, even though it's not supposed to, and causing these pipes to have way too much water in them, more than it was ever designed to hold. And that sewage overflows into our streets and ultimately into our streams, and in some cases into your homes. So if you have a sewage backup coming up on the heels of Hurricane Ida, it was likely caused by a capacity-related sewage event, and that means that you may be eligible for reimbursement or direct assistance through Baltimore City through their sewage on-site support program. And again, this is something that eligibility is required and determined by Baltimore City if you're a Baltimore City resident. But if you experience a sewage backup caused by a verified wet weather capacity event, which may happen because of this excessive rainfall that we're about to have, you should look into the SOS Sewage On-Site Support Program or the Expedited Reimbursement Program, and we'll have more information about that soon.
Okay, Alice, this is the number one question we get here. Is it safe to go in the water?
That is a huge question. Is it safe to go in the water? So there's a lot of layers to that question. And what I would say is that our bacteria monitoring that we've been doing in the harbor since 2010 and beyond since 2013 has given us a really good baseline of data that we've been able to do some trends analyses on. And what that means is that we can look at our huge long-term set of data and say, okay, is bacteria over time getting better or worse? And what we can see is that at about 60% of our stations, bacteria is getting better over time. And at the stations where it's not getting better, it's also not getting worse. It's actually already pretty good. And that's out in our tidal stations near the mouth of the Patapsco. And that's awesome. That's great news. However, getting better doesn't mean good enough. So many of our stations that are the most polluted are actually showing signals of the best improvement, which is really exciting because that means that the projects on land that we're implementing to reduce bacteria may be working to actually reduce bacteria in our waterways, which is so great. That's exciting. But they're not quite there yet. So there are many cases where our waterways are not yet fit for human recreation or even letting your pets play in them, but it's all up to personal risk. at the end of the day. There are other counties within the state of Maryland that give swimming advisories, things like 48 hours after a major rainfall, you shouldn't touch the water. And I haven't seen those types of advisories come out from Baltimore City, but what I can say is that we know the bacteria levels are much higher right after a major rainstorm. We know they're definitely much higher after a major sewage overflow, whether that's dry weather or wet weather. So we can't ever say with true confidence that it's safe to swim at a particular location unless we have bacteria data to back that up. So we have, a better idea over time of whether or not it's safe to recreate in our local waterways. What I know for sure is that every single person has the right to recreate in their local waterways. And Blue Water Baltimore is doing everything we can to make sure that that right is protected.
Can you talk at all about non-human life? So how will this affect fish and wildlife in the harbor and river?
That's a great question. So a lot of people have this idea about the Baltimore Harbor that it's lifeless or toxic and we should never touch it. And I know this is kind of confusing coming off of the question that I just answered. But the reality is that our waterways are teeming with life. They are alive. And so we need to protect the fish and the benthic organisms, everything that's also living and depending upon our local waterways. So at these wastewater treatment plants, huge amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus are being discharged. And again, when I'm talking about nitrogen and phosphorus, I'm not just talking about abstract, arbitrary chemicals. I'm talking about fish kills. So when there's a lot of nutrient pollution in a local waterway, when there's nitrogen and phosphorus, that feeds the naturally occurring algae in a waterway. And when you get an overabundance of plant food in a plant ecosystem, the plants start growing out of control. And that's what an algae bloom is. So those algae blooms can be toxic to wildlife all on their own if it's something called carlodinium or some other types of algae blooms. But more commonly, what happens is that once that algae bloom explodes in growth, it eventually starts to die off. And when it starts to die off, bacteria come and decompose the dying algae. That's sometimes what that cabbage smell is downtown. And once that algae gets decomposed, the oxygen gets sucked out of the water by those decomposing bacteria. And so once the oxygen gets sucked out of the water, then the fish are in trouble and the crabs are in trouble. And so this is an issue that has far-ranging effects. These treatment plants, particularly the Patapsco wastewater treatment plant, it is downstream of the harbor. So it's easy to think, well, it's downstream of the harbor, it's along the main stem of the Patapsco, so it doesn't really impact Baltimore, or it doesn't really impact local water quality. But that's just not true, because we know that the flow of the river actually brings that water up into the harbor. And so the harbor is getting squeezed between sewage overflows upstream and these illegal sewage discharges downstream. And that is part of the reason why we have this ever-present sewage problem in the harbor leading to algae blooms.
All right, I want to come back to those treatment plants. We got another question on Instagram yesterday, and I'm summarizing a lot of questions. Is this happening at the treatment plants because of a lack of funding?
Right.
Where does the funding for these treatment plants come from?
So I like to say that Baltimore residents, and this is Baltimore City and County residents, are paying for this sewage problem in three distinct ways. First, they're paying for it in their water bills. Second, they're paying for any of the stipulated penalties or the legal penalties associated with sewage overflows under the modified consent decree. So every time there's a sewage overflow in Baltimore, ratepayers end up having to ultimately pay those stipulated penalties that MDE applies. And then third, Baltimore City residents and Baltimore County residents are paying for this issue when sewage backs up into their homes, and they're paying for it financially, emotionally, and psychologically. And so Baltimore residents are already paying for this issue. And, I think it's probably on everybody's mind, why are these issues happening? Why are these deficiencies happening at these wastewater treatment plants? I'll say it's not clear to me that this is purely a funding issue. MDE's findings indicate significant operational and maintenance problems at both of these plants. And so that does not preclude lack of funding or staffing, but clearly these are violations that are having significant impacts on our rivers. And at the end of the day, yes, these are going to be timely and expensive issues to fix, but we cannot sacrifice our rivers on the backs of our wastewater treatment plants.
And who all is served by these treatment plants?
These treatment plants together serve 1.6 million people. And so the population of Baltimore City is under 600,000 at this point. So that's a million county residents as well. This is not just a city issue, even though these plants are owned and operated by Baltimore City. This is a Maryland issue. You know, these are the two biggest wastewater treatment plants in the entire state of Maryland. So even if you live in a place that isn't directly serviced by these plants are contributing pollution that is degrading the entire Chesapeake Bay.
All right, and can you talk a little bit more about the monitoring program? A couple of people have asked questions. Who is it? What do you do? How does it work?
Sure, absolutely. So our water quality monitoring program is operated by really two staff members here at Blue Water Baltimore, and other staff fill in and get to come out monitoring with us when they can. But my colleagues, Barbara Johnson and Cody Madison, are really at the helm of this program right now. And so I have a copy of one of our recent report cards that shows the scope of our monitoring grid. So as you can see from this map, this is the Baltimore Harbor right here. It looks like a little crab claw. That's how you know it's Baltimore Harbor. And so we have 27 non-tidal monitoring stations up in the Gwynns Falls and Jones Falls watersheds. And then we have 22 stations in the Baltimore Harbor, the main stem of the tidal Patapsco, and then in the tributaries that flow into the Patapsco River. So we're out there monitoring water quality in the streams once per month, all year long. And then in the tidal Patapsco, we're out there every single week. So our stations are set up in a monitoring grid so that we can do every other week sampling at those locations. But we're out on the water every single week doing patrols and collecting samples.
Okay, and then I know that the idea of fats, oils, and grease as a pollutant can be a little confusing.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about fog here.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more about what happens when that kind of stuff gets into our water?
Yeah, so this concept of fog, at the Patapsco wastewater treatment plant, one of the biggest violations that was discovered has to do with how the plant filters out fog. And one of the biggest findings, I think, one of the grossest findings from the inspection report was that out of 18 of those settling tanks, where the solids settle out to the bottom, only 5 of the 18 settling tanks are currently operational because the others are so caked with fats, oils, and grease that they're dysfunctional. And MDE says that without immediate action, those other 5 will also fall into disrepair. So I have a mini science experiment to show you what fog is, what fats, oils, and grease is. So really, when you flush your toilet, I know, we didn't know this was going here. When you flush your toilet at home, the only thing that you're supposed to be flushing down the toilet is human waste and toilet paper. Those are the only things that are supposed to go down the toilet. But a lot of times other things get flushed down the toilet as well. Things like paper towels or baby wipes or dental floss or Q-tips or anything else. So all of that stuff that gets flushed but shouldn't mixes together with grease that gets put down the drain and shouldn't. So you know, when you're roasting a turkey and you have all those turkey drippings at the bottom of the pan at the end of the day on Thanksgiving, you're supposed to throw away that grease in the trash instead of pouring it down the sink. Because if you pour it down the sink, it might be hot enough to go down your pipes at the beginning, but as it's in the pipes, it'll start coagulating, and it mixes together with all of those paper towels and Q-tips that people flushed, and they create these big balls, these fog monsters or these grease balls in the sewer system that get lodged and stuck in the pipes. So I have a science experiment for you here. I just filled up this little jar just of plain water, and this is a piece of toilet paper. So yes, I brought a roll of toilet paper into my office to do the science experiment. So this is going to show you why you shouldn't be flushing paper towels or really anything else that's not toilet paper. So when you put toilet paper into water, yeah, see that? When you flush the toilet, it goes through the pipes, it mixes with everybody else's sewage on your street, it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and by the time it gets to the wastewater treatment plant, it's really started to break down. So you can kind of see that it's all like cloudy now. It's not all in one nice piece. It's started to break down. The toilet paper is designed to break down. Okay, you can kind of see that. And now I'm going to show you what happens in the same way if you flush something other than toilet paper. So anything else you flush, and this is tissues, like facial tissues that you blow your nose with, or paper towels, which I'm about to show you. So this is a piece of paper towel from our office. Sorry, Jeff. This is what happens when you flush a paper towel. Just like the toilet paper, you use it for whatever you needed to use it for. It goes down the pipes, it swirls around, takes a left turn, finally gets to the wastewater treatment plant. And by the time it gets there, it's still a paper towel. Nothing has happened to it. It has not broken down, because paper towels, unlike toilet paper, are designed to stay together when they get wet. That's their whole purpose, is to soak up liquids and stay together. Just like facial tissues, they're designed to stay together when they get wet. It does not break down. And so these types of things are clogging our wastewater treatment plants and causing these really major issues that are leading to millions of gallons of partially untreated sewage being discharged into our local waterways every single day. And so yes, this is a major issue that the city needs to rectify and the regulators need to be on top of. There needs to be more accountability. But every single person also has a role to play here. And every single person watching right now, anybody that you tell about this little science experiment, hopefully can prevent some of these problems from happening at the source. So the only thing that should get flushed is toilet paper. The only thing that should go down the drain is soap, and nothing that does this. Nothing that is designed to stay together should go into your toilet or the sanitary sewer system at all, because all of that, just you're one person, but imagine if an entire city is doing it. Imagine if an entire sewer shed is doing it. And that's what's leading to these problems at the wastewater treatment plants.
All right, Alice, the last question we've gotten so far is just about the scope. And a lot of people have said, how big a problem is this, and what does that volume of water really look like?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. This is not a small problem. This is a major issue in Baltimore. And like I said earlier, this is a major issue for the entire Bay region. So the Chesapeake Bay TMDL it's part of a regulatory framework that really paints a picture towards protecting and restoring the Chesapeake Bay. And that Bay TMDL, or total maximum daily load, or pollution diet, the Bay pollution diet is an interjurisdictional multi-state agreement for how we get to cleaner water. And that agreement only works if every key player plays their part. So if we have the two biggest wastewater treatment plants in the state of Maryland polluting beyond their permitted levels and discharging partially untreated sewage into our rivers, eventually flowing into the bay, then those players are not adhering to the rules. They're not playing their part. And so we won't be able to successfully achieve the terms of the Bay TMDL or pollution diet if we stay on this same path. This is a big issue. This is the same volume of the same volume of partially untreated sewage being discharged every single day, about the size of a wading pool the size of Patterson Park. So if you look on Google Maps and you look at Patterson Park, a wading pool that size is being discharged every single day from these wastewater treatment plants. And that's partially untreated sewage. This is a lot of pollution we're talking about. This is a serious issue that needs to be rectified today.
All right. That's all the questions we've gotten so far, but I'm sure it's not all the questions we'll get. So we encourage you to stay in touch with us. We'll be communicating about developments. We expect this hopefully to move quickly, especially if people spread the word, and this gets the attention it deserves. So the last thing we'll ask is to sign up for our newsletter, to make sure you're following us on Facebook, tell a friend, look out for our emails. And you can find all the ways to get involved with Blue Water Baltimore at bluewaterbaltimore.org/act.
All right, thanks everybody.